Good morning.
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 Well, how awful is it when one with whom you have made a commitment betrays that commitment? In a marriage, if that happens, it's called adultery. God has viewed the relationship that He has had with mankind as a marital relationship. He has had relationships with us since the creation of man. Sadly, in His relationships with humans, while God has always remained faithful, man has so often been unfaithful, committing what I will term spiritual adultery. From the beginning, in the Garden of Eden, man has been looking for something better, as if God might not have allowed us what we might think would be better. Eve, when tempted by Satan with the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and that the tree was desired to make one wise. She broke God's trust and cheated on God by taking of that fruit, she and her husband Adam. We can see through time how man, with whom God has been trying to have a relationship, has betrayed God's trust. God has always told man what He requires from man to have that relationship, but man doesn't listen too well to what God says. In the first instance, God was clear in telling them not to eat of the fruit, even telling them the consequences of eating the fruit. However, the lure of something which might be better was too great. Later, in dealing with the Israelites, after He had brought them out of slavery in Egypt and was about to bring them into the promised land, He warned them about idolatry. This was one of those things where God was telling them about the relationship and how to keep that relationship with Him. In Deuteronomy 12, we'll see something that God says about having that relationship with Him. Deuteronomy 12, verse 29. When the Lord your God cuts off before you the nations with whom you go to dispossess, and you dispossess them and dwell in their land, take care that you be not ensnared to follow them after they have been destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their God, that I may also do the same? You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, for every abominable thing that the Lord hates, they have done for their gods, for they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. Then He says, everything that I command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add to it or take away from it. As we know, the Israelites didn't follow God's instructions and were constantly seeking to find a better way, whether it was a better way to have fun and do things for themselves, or even a better way to worship God. Let's turn to Hosea chapter 3, and we'll read something about what the Israelites did. Or how God considered the Israelites. Hosea 3 and verse 1, and the Lord said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love cakes of raisin. See, God was pointing out the fact that Israel always seemed to turn towards other things instead of following His commands like He tells them to do exactly what He says, and they always look for another way. In Hosea chapter 4 and verse 12, we'll see something that it says here about that. God's still talking about it. It says, my people inquire of a piece of wood, and the walking staff gives them oracles. For a spirit of whoredom has led them astray, and they have left their God to play the whore. So he even describes Israel as a whore. That's pretty sad. But even today, those who claim to follow Christ have chosen to look for a better way to worship and to serve God. They have borrowed a better way from the pagans. Let's take a look at 3 so-called Christian days that the church has committed spiritual adultery in their efforts to worship God. One of the 10 commandments tells us God has made one day of the week, the 7th day, a day holy and sacred to him. In Exodus 20 and verse 8, we'll read where God tells Israel that. Exodus 20 and verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy. And he repeats this command again to enforce to them how important that was in Exodus 31. In verse 12, and the Lord said to Moses, you are to speak to the people of Israel and say, above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. Whoever does any work on it, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days work shall be done, but the 7th is the Sabbath day of solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. Therefore the people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout their generations as a covenant forever. So the Sabbath was made that important to the people of God. And anybody that would worship him, anybody that would look at this book, his holy word, and try to see what does God command them, what does God expect of them, how do they have that relationship with him? It's got to do with the Sabbath day. At least that's one of the things. And how important is this to God? Let's look over in Numbers chapter 15, and you'll see that it wasn't something you could take lightly. Numbers chapter 15, and we're going to read 32. While the people of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him in custody, but it had not been made clear what should be done to him. And the Lord said to Moses, the man shall be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. And all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death with stones, as the Lord commanded Moses. So, how important was it for this day, this Sabbath day that God had commanded? It was so important that to make the point, he had them stone someone. Otherwise, they might all think, look, that's cool, we can go do that too. But what has this Christian church of today done? They have accepted another day of worship, a day established by a Roman emperor. in the process of becoming Christian, he did this for political gain. In AD 321, Constantine, the Roman emperor, chose Sunday, the first day of the week, as a day that used to honor Mithra, the sun god. It would be the day for Christians to observe, and the rest of the churches, most of them, followed in this practice, gladly giving up the Sabbath. Now imagine you and your spouse were to set a day, a particular day of the week, to be your special day. Some people call it a date night. And you're celebrating that relationship that you share. Then your spouse comes in and says, ooh, I've got a different day. We're going to keep. Someone else told me about a day, and it honors somebody else, but me and you are going to celebrate that day for us. Can you imagine that? What would you think? Well, that's what the churches have done by going and keeping Sunday, a day that was actually to celebrate the sun god, and it's even named Sunday. How would you feel if that was you? Well, imagine how God feels when people worship him, discarding his Sabbath, and say they're celebrating to him on a pagan day, a day that was better in their eyes. Okay, next, let's look at a celebration of your birthday. Your spouse says, we're going to celebrate your birthday. And here's the way we're going to do it. And then your spouse comes in with a date that you recognize. It's the date of one of her old boyfriends or his girlfriends, one of their lovers from the past. It's their birthday. And they say, that's the day we're going to choose to celebrate. And we're even going to keep all the trappings that used to be with that person. They don't know your actual date of birth, but that date was chosen for a reason, because they looked and they saw something that looked more appealing, something that looked like it would be better. The celebration would include customs, symbols, and decorations borrowed from that past lover. Well, that's what Christmas, which is supposedly the birth of Christ, has done in saying this is the day we celebrate his birth. It was made official in the Christian churches in 221 AD by a man named Sextus Julius Africanus. He declared December 25th I'll probably butcher this, Dies Solis Invicti Nati, which is the Latin for Day of the Birth of the Unconquered Sun. It was a popular Roman holiday, and now by the churches it was accepted as the birth of Christ. These modern churches think God enjoys that celebration too. Can you imagine how that would make you feel if it was done like I told you? Somebody said, we're going to celebrate your birthday on this day that represented someone else. So finally, let's take a look at Easter. What's not to like about Easter? It's bright and colorful and cheerful and supposing to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. If Eve had been looking for a celebration, she would have seen how pretty it was and how it was to make her spiritually wise, just like that forbidden fruit was supposed to do. Well, the name Easter comes from the Anglo-Saxon estre, sorry I butchered that, a pagan goddess of fertility and of light and of the spring. And her symbols are rabbits and eggs. I'm sure God is pleased when he sees all that. Imagine your spouse declaring you're going to celebrate your anniversary on a day named after one of their old lovers, with the symbols that they used to use to celebrate together. Can you imagine how that would make you feel? I can imagine how God feels about it. Well, today, we must maintain our own diligence in following God, keeping His commands and observing His days. We don't want God to say to us what He said to the Israelites in Jeremiah 23. And it's interesting, this was a little bit of that song we just sang. It was from Jeremiah 23. Jeremiah 23, and we'll start with in verse 14. Actually, in verse 13, it says, "In the prophets of Samaria, I saw an unsavory thing. They prophesied by Baal and led my people Israel astray." But that's kind of understandable because of where they were and how they had been so removed. But then he says, "But in the prophets of Jerusalem, I have seen a horrible thing. They commit adultery and walk in lies." And I truly think the adultery they committed that he was talking about was adultery of going after foreign gods. So what we have to do then, to keep God from saying that to us, we have to make sure we use this, God's holy word, to confirm our relationship with God, to make sure that it's right in His eyes, and then we will know that we are not committing spiritual adultery.